Welcome back to Pillow Talk Sessions. I'm Christian Lipinski, joined as always by my co-host, Jessica Gillingham.
Thank you, Christian. And today we're joined by Kevin Murphy, who is the co-founder and chief operating officer at Renew. Now, Renew is a tech company that's reimagining the multifamily rental experience by combining hospitality principles, smart technology, and a sort of deeply resident-centric approach to the renewal process.
We'll also be diving into the hotelification of rentals, the role of loyalty in a transit industry, and how Renew is building an ecosystem that puts flexibility, connection, and service at the heart of modern renting.
Kevin, welcome to the Pillow Talk Sessions podcast. It's really great to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. But before we sort of get into the nub of it, could you please introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your background, but also Renew as well?
Yeah, sure. First off, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity. My background, I've been in real estate for, oh gosh, a little over 15 years. And I kind of fell into multifamily, single family real estate in my career. I started off planning on going to law school as a broke college kid and realized that probably wouldn't work right out of school. So I got some really good advice that I should get into sales. And I found my way to a company called Fastenal. I ended up managing a territory there for about 2 or 3 years, but a 23-year-old managing people. I was very green, fell on my face multiple times, had a great manager, but learned a ton. And then decided that I really needed to hone my skills. I love sales, and everybody needs to learn how to sell. It's a very valuable skill. So I found multifamily. I found a company that was at the time was called Apartment Guide or Primedia, which became RentPath, which then became Rent. And I was there for a little over 8 years. I kind of started from the ground up, worked my way up throughout that organization, went through privately held, publicly traded to private equity. And when private equity came in, TPG and Providence, really got an opportunity to cut my teeth, run, national sales and customer success there, and really play a major role in how we went to market, and rethinking how we went to market. And there was a big shift in the digital transformation, going from print to digital. I'm dating myself, but it was a big moment. And then through that process, just realized I loved the industry, and I loved the build. So found Jetty and was introduced to the CEO there, and the CEO of Jetty, which is a financial services company for renters. I came on board there. It was there for about 4 years as their chief revenue officer, took them through Series A almost to C, and through that experience met my co-founder, Rob Hayden, and we decided that we saw a lot of the issues I'm sure we'll talk about, and decided to go start our own thing. So now currently the founder, CEO, and president of Renew. And Renew is a renewal and retention platform for multifamily and single family operators. And what we aim to do, and our mission is to make renting more meaningful and valuable for everyone. And the goal there is really to provide appropriate technology to fix the breakage in the industry. Renters come through their leasing, and every time they get to the renewal moment, they're asked to repurchase that product, and it's a very broken experience. And it really is the crux of, I think, what we're going to talk about a lot today. And Renew is aiming to fix that.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. It's like what it feels like, or it looks like on the surface, is quite a simple thing that you solve for, but actually it's really, there is so much more to it than just what looks on the surface like renewals. Like, there's so much to it, and it kind of fits in perfectly a little bit with the things that we like to discuss on this podcast, which is one of the themes and topics is around the hotelization of real estate, and about how we're kind of constantly now looking at a customer focus on how we deliver a product, how we deliver a service. Looking forward to hearing more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jessica, that's a good segue into one of the first topics that we're covering. Hi, Kevin. Welcome to the show as well. Let's jump right into that hotelification of rentals. There's this growing trend of what some are calling, and including us. We've been talking a lot about it on the podcast, and as Jessica just mentioned, the hotelification of in the U.S. is called multifamily, and Europe maybe build to rent. But what does that mean to you, and how is Renew tapping into this shift, especially with this resident expectation now?
Yeah, I think the resident expectation is probably moving faster than the actual experience on the operator side. But this shift has been happening for, I think, a very long time, or it's been trying to happen for a very long time. And hotelification is something that myself and Rob we honed in on very early on, and it was a big part of our thesis that there was gonna be a lot of tailwinds here. But I think a lot of people, when they think of hotelification, they immediately think of Marriott Bonvoy and points. And I think that is absolutely a piece of it, right? Is how do you create meaningful value for the resident for being loyal or staying within, an ecosystem. But the difference between a hotel experience, an average of, maybe just over 2 day stay and an 18-month tenure of a renter in an apartment is very different, right? So there's a lot of challenges there. But I think that hotelification really means a lot more than just like points and value. I think you know, um, it's really about the experience that residents, being on-demand service, technology forward, being able to get an access to the things that they need in a timely manner. But you're talking about something that's very, very, very different, right? You're talking about somebody's home, which is a very different feeling, and I think it emotes a very different experience from the renter and feelings from the renter than it does from someone who's staying in a hotel for a couple of days. But this trend has been moving in this direction for a very long time. And one of the things that we saw at Renew when we started the business was that there's this trust gap between operators and residents, and this trust gap is really one of the main issues with loyalty in this space. And the other thing that I think is something that we struggle with is around how fractured this industry is. It's very hard, when you have major players in the hotel space like Marriott, like Hilton. You have a very fragmented industry in multifamily where 1%, less than 1% are renting at Greystar, which is by far the largest operator of apartments in the world. But majority are renting down at that mid-market SMB micro or individual owner level, right? And to create loyalty within that experience is very, very, very difficult. But what we found was that if you wanted to do it, it's because when we started the business, we started thinking, like, we came from financial services background at Jetty, and we started thinking, oh, 401k for renters, or whatever the financial services product might be to add value. And we took that to some of our good friends in the industry on the operating side, and they were like, guys, that's great, but at the end of the day, every 18 months that experience breaks, and they can't take that with them, and you're not really creating value here. So that breakage is really the core issue with hotelification and creating loyalty in that space. If I'm an owner of properties and I'm giving somebody points, those points don't go to the next operator when I move, right? And I have to start that process all over again. So I think between how fragmented the industry is, the trust gap between the renter and the operator, it's very transactional. We see it's this industry struggles to really move in that direction. But I think that really it all breaks down at this core moment that we have overlooked for pretty much ever, which is the renewal moment. We're asking a resident in these buildings to repurchase the product. Historically, we've done that through, piece of paper under a door, or a PDF in an email, and just with a lot of legal language that's quite frankly terrifying, and it's been a pretty bad experience. And I think that needs to shift if we're going to start to create loyalty, and that's what Renew is doing. We're trying to fix it, because if you can fix that renewal moment and control the outflow of renters, people are going to move. But how do you make that movement seamless? How do you allow them to take their products with them and ultimately create a lot more value in that process?
It's so interesting, Kevin, and such an interesting kind of perspective on what you're bringing to the market. And firstly, thank you for sort of giving us your explanation of hotelization in multifamily. And I guess what I would sort of say to that, it's around making sure that the customer feels valued, isn't it? So that's kind of what we mean. And it might be that it's about the experience and it's making sure that it's seamless, all of those things let's say traditionally hotels have done service really well, but it's about making the resident feel valued, whether they and actually when they move out as well, or when they're thinking about moving out as well. And so if traditionally it might be a PDF, legal language, something through the door, how are you doing it differently? Like, how are you doing it where you're making the customer, the end user, feel valued and feel like, they're getting a great experience even in that bit?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I think is the most important is renewal doesn't start at 90 days or 60 days to lease expiration. Renewal starts, in our opinion, on day one, and I think day one of the lease. And I think most operators would agree with that. So it's really about trying to better understand your renter and who's living in your buildings and what's working and what's not working. And historically, as an industry, we've collected a lot of data from these residents. We do surveys, and there's a lot of cool things happening. Companies that are, doing a lot around renter sentiment. The problem is that that data ends up in spreadsheets and in decks for owners and investors, but it actually doesn't impact the resident experience. That data does not actually come through at the renewal moment. And we say, hey, Jessica, we know you had a maintenance issue. Like, we're so sorry. Is there anything we can do? We hope we can keep you as a customer. I mean, just even something as basic as that, of being able to identify that and personalize the experience and show empathy that, mistakes are going to happen, and that's okay. It's just a matter of being able to address them. So the way Renew really does that is by, taking into consideration renter sentiment, personalizing that experience. It's more than just delivery of and operationalizing of the renewal, but it's also giving residents value there and making them feel valued at that property. So taking that data, creating a personalized experience, starting that experience earlier. We always say that renewal is very much like tax season. It's like if you're using TurboTax, it's, hey, get ready for tax season. You got a lot of stuff to do, right? Well, the same applies for renewal, right? You want to give people a heads up. Hey, your renewal's coming up. Is there anything that we could be doing better? Is there anything we can be doing different? And then understanding that and making sure that that information you're collecting makes its way into the experience at the renewal moment. And Renew does that. And the last thing I'll say about it is around pathways. Today most of the other solutions in the space are like, here's your renewal, yes or no, take it or leave it. But we all know, if you've been living in an apartment for an average of 12 months, a lot changes. You might need to upgrade your apartment, downgrade your apartment. You might be waiting on a job. You might need to relocate. You might need, just a different unit for whatever reason. So there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of changes that happen. And one of the things that we believe is very important is creating those pathways. And we've done a lot of work to create those pathways for residents, which ultimately creates a much better experience for them. So they feel like, oh, I can be renewed as a resident and not just as this lease in this one particular unit.
So it is thinking about them as individuals and what their sort of need is, rather than this is the unit that they have. So what happens if they say, loved living here, but it's time to move on? It could be I'm having a baby and I need, a bigger apartment, or it could be that I'm moving to the other side of the country. What happens then? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, our product knows that. So we're learning about these residents throughout the experience, leading up to renewal. And then obviously we learn more information and we adjust accordingly and we give them the options. We're not going to just say, oh, you're having a baby and you need a bigger apartment. Okay, like, see ya. That's a very valuable asset that they've paid a ton of money to acquire. They've paid a lot of money to try to hopefully keep them happy while they're living in that apartment. You don't want to just let them walk out the door. So a lot of our partners see value in saying, okay, what else can we do? And that's what our product does. What can we do to keep you? Would you like a bigger apartment? Would you like to look across our portfolio at other communities that might be a better fit for you because they're within walking distance of your child's school, or something, or daycare. So there's a lot of value there, and that obviously drives much better results than yes or no, make a decision, please. One, you're going to drive much faster decisions because you're giving people options, and then two, you're going to see obviously an impact on retention. You're going to see people stay, and especially not only in unit retention because they feel more cared for, and you're taking that renter sentiment and making that part of the experience, but also that you're trying to keep them within your ecosystem, which can it's a win-win for both parties, right? Which is win-win for the resident because they're getting better experience, and it's also financially a win-win for the operator. And in this industry, if you bring a product and you're not serving both sides of the lease, it's a very difficult way to go to market. So it's a very important piece of what we do.
No, it's super interesting, and you touched a little bit on each of the other topics that we're discussing today. So I want to kind of go back a little bit and kind of dive a little bit deeper on one of the first ones that you briefly touched on. It's loyalty. Building this brand loyalty, and these programs have been the staple of hospitality. Whether it's airlines or hotel chains. But they're very relatively rare in multifamily. Why do you think this is? And, how can this loyalty change the renter's experience?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think this is the crux of this actually comes down to that multifamily or real estate in general is fundamentally an underwriting business and not a service business. They optimize, these owners are optimizing for yield, risk mitigation, asset value, and not necessarily like service excellence. So you just don't the incentives are not aligned in any way, right? When I'm an owner and I'm like, well, IRR is my internal rate of return is my most important metric, not how Christian and Jessica feel about their experience. Like, I don't care, I'll get a better trade out, right? However, the math doesn't math when you really look at it. There's so much NOI opportunity there at the renewal moment, and that's what we preach to the industry and to our customers, that this can be optimized. But I think that it's fundamentally it's very hard to look at a resident as an owner of a building, to look at a resident and say, oh, I'm okay with them moving and incurring that turn cost, and thinking about renewing them as a resident across my portfolio and not just in this unit, right? It's a total shift in the way that we've approached multifamily and single family real estate for a long time. Now, single family, I think, is more advanced in this. They do a better job of saying, hey, we have a lot of other options here, especially your institutionalized owners and operators. But multifamily historically has been very resistant to thinking about the resident in that way. And I think that's really, I mean, there's a lot of other reasons, and I'll hit on one more after this, but I think that's really at the crux of it, is that we don't necessarily want to incentivize movement and flexibility, because at the end of the day, this is an underwriting business and that doesn't work for us. And then I think the last major, I mean, I could talk about this one for probably the whole time, but the last one I'll say, and not to throw stones, but the technology in the space, mainly the property management software that has kind of handcuffed the industry for so many years, has not evolved in the right way to allow for that more renter centric, if you will, that seamless movement. It's very much been by a unit and not a unit record and not a resident record. And that also has a major downstream impact on the resident experience, because every time they move, their data doesn't go with them, their experience breaks. They have to get dropped back into a listing site like Zillow, who knows nothing about them. And we're really trying to fix that. And if you can fix that breakage, right? If you could fix that breakage first, because you have to be able to fix that. And if you can fix that, then you can start to think about, okay, how can I make this work for the operator by fixing the breakage in that experience? And then is there an opportunity then to offer value to the resident? And because, our whole thing is, if you can return value back to the operator, hopefully some of that value you can return can be shared with the renter, to make it a win-win for both sides.
You've talked about something that is so important and prevalent actually across all lodging sectors, because we don't just look at multifamily, we look at hospitality on this show, we look at short-term rentals, we look at the different living sectors, and about how a lot of the tech isn't there yet. It's not where the operators need it to be. And it's like there's great innovation in the point solutions, like you guys, around the edge, but actually the sort of the core PMSs, are still legacy, and they're not allowing for that innovation to come in to then really provide, to be able to provide what the consumer actually, is either wanting now or really certainly will be. um, a question I have for you is this shift. So we obviously, we've got the tech limitations here, but the mind shift of multifamily to start to look at the resident in a different way and start to look at their assets in a different way rather than as a unit. Do you think that multifamily is there yet, or close to there, or what else might be a challenge to kind of have that shift happen a little bit more?
Yeah, I think the industry wants to be there. I think we have a pricing problem. I think if you look at how we price residents, for example, if a renter is at renewal, we price them in their current unit. And again, this comes back to fundamentally how these businesses are run and looked at, but I always try to champion, thinking about pricing your resident in for a bunch of different options, not just saying, oh, well, here's our incoming rent that we posted online, but saying, hey, if you want to need to move to another property, let us know and we'll price that specifically for you. Or if it's, hey, you need to upgrade to a two-bedroom. I think that the way what we offer residents and how we price them makes it very, very difficult to move in that direction. Also, I think, again, I talked about how fragmented this industry is. I think that also just causes issues. But I think the industry wants to move in this direction. I think there's a lot of cool companies doing things out there, even beside Renew. I mean, you have Landing out there that's doing some pretty cool stuff. I mean, Built is shaking up the industry in a very positive way. And has really put a lot of pressure back on the property management software. And you've seen a lot of shift because they've gotten into the payments sector, and that's kind of the bread and butter for a lot of these property management software companies, and it has kind of subsidized it hasn't kind of it has subsidized their other products for a very long time. And now they're starting to put a lot more pressure on them, which I think is good, because at the end of the day they're going to be positioned really well for mobility, renter wallet. But at the end of the day, what we believe is you have to own the workflow, and Renew owns the workflow. And that's a very, very important and very, very important piece, in my opinion. So I think the industry wants to be there. I think we're still a little ways away from creating the right resident experience, but I will tell you, over the last 12 months, there's a lot of tailwinds, and it's moving much faster than it has in my 15 years in the industry.
Loyalty is really difficult to do, and I think there's often a sort of a misconception of what loyalty is, or loyalty programs are, or how do you kind of foster that loyalty. And I think the reason for that is we see the hotel brands doing loyalty. We see Bonvoy points, we see, Hilton points, whatever it is, thinking that that's kind of loyalty. But actually, loyalty done really well is about a relationship. So it's about listening and understanding the consumer, so you're able to meet their needs and meet them where they're at. And I wonder if multifamily is kind of ready for that sort of perception of loyalty.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think loyalty means a lot more than points. Obviously, it's about the experience, as well, and I think the industry is moving in that direction. I struggle to see personally how individual companies within this space, due to how fragmented the industry is, will be able to create, loyalty. Greystar obviously is probably the exception with over 1 million units and just, such a large footprint. They're probably best positioned to do it, but even them, it's going to be, it's still, it's a massive undertaking, right? And there's a lot of companies out there who are offering points for different things, but again, we're just starting to scratch the surface, there. But I think what has to happen is that there has to be these other networks that are created. And the underlying properties could be Greystar, could be Willow Bridge, could be, Equity Camden, it could be the REITs, whatever it might be. Now, I think that's controversial if you go to an operator and say, we just want you to underlie the Renew network, be underlying in the Renew network. The resident doesn't know the difference. They're part of this Renew ecosystem where they're getting value. I think that direction is much more likely than companies being able to create their own Marriott Bonvoy just because of how transient this industry is.
When you have a brand, and you maintain the brand, it's all about the experience, and that sticks in people's memories when they go and move, or they have any kind of conversations with somebody that's looking to move somewhere. I want to switch to a topic that we love to talk about here on the podcast, and that's technology. It's definitely a forte of Jessica's as well, so I'm sure she'll have a bunch of questions. But the first part of the question I want to talk about is, this idea of automation. AI has been huge across property sectors, living sector, rental, hospitality, short-term rentals. It's all anybody's talking at any of these events that you go to. As more property managers adopt automation, there's a real question about how to maintain genuine human connection. Where do you see the balance between operational efficiency and then this idea of hotelization or hospitality in the rental world?
Yeah, yeah. Automation is key and very important, and we, as an industry, spend a lot of time on unnecessary tasks. So I think I will start by saying that I believe that artificial intelligence is going to make this industry better, much more efficient, and that is going to have a massive impact on the resident experience. And I'll talk more about loyalty, but I do, we kind of live by the FedEx founder Fred Smith said, automate the routine and humanize the exception. And I think when you get into like hospitality, or any type of living situation, I think that's going to ring true for for the foreseeable future. I mean, I think the jury's out on, is AI going to be able to, or AI agents going to be able to be empathetic and provide that experience? I mean, today, absolutely not. And it's the technology, quite frankly, isn't there yet. But the way we have been approaching it is actually, there's definitely a conversational AI approach, which is fine, but you have to be very careful, because that can actually hurt the experience sometimes more than it can actually help. But I think where AI is actually going to benefit this industry is actually allowing for to remove those rote tasks off the plate of the people who are there to provide the appropriate customer service to the residents, and allow them to focus more on that service aspect, which will then obviously have a massive impact on what we talk brand loyalty and willingness to stay within an ecosystem of these partners. But today we ask them to be property managers, accountants, project managers, maintenance managers. I mean, they have too much on their plate. And I think that the biggest win with this type of technology is going to be AI agents that make the teams, whether those are centralized or specialized teams, whether that is still dispersed out to the individual properties. I think that's where the technology is going to thrive, and that's how we're looking at it right now, is building that technology to really support the teams that can then create the experience that's needed to ultimately get us to, before we even get into the loyalty conversation, you need to fix the experience. And I think that's where that's going right now. And I think that experience will improve drastically, and kind of in parallel, the technology will catch up and will improve. And I think AI will have a massive impact on how these companies like Renew integrate into these partners. I think the days of, give us $100,000 and you can integrate with us, but limited. I think those days are numbered. And as those two things happen, I think now we move into a very strong position as an industry to start thinking about loyalty in a different way.
That's all great. And it's really looking at tech as an enabler, isn't it? As an enabler of that of the service, but also operations and all of those things. Is there any specific, and I guess we can actually look at it in the renew process. Is there any elements of that should always be a human and never be automated or using technology for, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the exception, and the ones that we see are, example would be, I've had an outstanding maintenance request for 3 months and nobody's fixed my refrigerator, and I think just saying, oh, we'll be out, again for the fifth time is probably not the appropriate response. I think that people today, and consumer behavior might shift over time, but I think as we stand today, people still expect that human touch, and empathy around that experience. I think that's one. I think the other is if I'm living at a property and I have been loyal and I want to find a new home, there is a certain subset, and this is not all. We see about 70% of renters come through untouched by anybody and go through the renewal process on Renew. I mean, that's extremely high, but there's still 30% of households that say, I want somebody to hold my hand, to talk to me. And I think that's pretty telling that there's still, a pretty significant number of people who have problems or need to speak to teams. And I think one of those others is I need something else. And I really want to have that conversation with somebody who understands my needs, my wants, and not just, click a button, you know, um, on a within an application. Now there are people who do that for sure, and are very, renting sight unseen, which is great. And the industry is moving more in that direction. The technology will get better and better, and you'll get a much better feel. But I still think that there's those type of exceptions, that people still want to, engage with someone and feel like they're a valued customer. And I don't believe AI is at that stage, and I don't think it will be for a little while. Think it will get there, for sure. But it's, in my opinion, it's not there today.
They also want it fixed and quick if it's their fridge.
Exactly. 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 Very quickly.
Yeah, and that's where AI can really translate this or articulate feelings and emotions, and so being having another person on the other line, they have this empathy that you can connect with them and you feel like you're being taken care of. Earlier in the conversation we talked a bit about resident sentiment and as a retention tool, but maybe we can talk a little bit more on it. As resident turnover is costly challenge in the rental market, what role do you think sentiment analysis and resident engagement actually play in improving retention and renewal outcomes?
It's massive. I mean, I think it's the, if not the most important thing, it's one of the top things. I think that if you don't understand your renters, I don't think that you're going to be able to drive the outcomes that you want. And obviously that's going to have a negative impact to your bottom line. And again, I think I said this at the top, but we're doing a lot around renter sentiment. We're collecting a lot of data. The biggest issue is that that data doesn't actually make it into how we service these residents living at these buildings. And that's what Renew is aiming to do, which is to better understand the renter sentiment, communicate with them accordingly, make sure that that data is getting back in a way that, teams don't have to go sift through a bunch of offers. We can pull that out directly using AI and say, Jessica, go reach out to Kevin because he's upset, and we can do that well in advance. And that can actually go through and be a part of that experience. And I think it's so critical if we're not doing that and we're not leveraging all this data that we have on these residents and that we're collecting throughout the lease. You're definitely going to underperform in the rent the in the renewal moment for sure. So Renew does a lot of that today. We're looking at renter sentiment. We're looking at how many maintenance requests does somebody have. We're providing the teams with propensity to renew scores, on them, and then as they go through the renewal process, we're also providing renewal momentum scores. How likely, is Kevin to renew his lease, based on the actions he's taken and the information that he's sharing with us, throughout the process. So that can be very, very powerful because it also, along the journey, gives those site teams or gives those centralized teams opportunity for service recovery.
Kevin, you're building something that is greater than just one apartment building or even one operator. What do it's almost like an ecosystem for renters, I believe. What's your long-term vision for not just for Renew, but for your customers, their customers, the multifamily market?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, our vision on paper is to make renting part of the American dream. I know it's lofty and large, but if you think about what that actually means, it means that, if I'm a renter, part of that Renew ecosystem, and I'm sitting down at a restaurant with my friends, and we want someone sitting there going, I'm never leaving the Renew ecosystem. I can move pretty freely throughout. I have, millions of apartments to choose from across the country. I can take all of my products with me. They know who I am. It's seamless. I'm earning some loyalty and value for being a renter within this ecosystem. And thinking about renting, the same way that we as a country think about home buying. Home buying is, out of reach for a lot of people and becoming more out of reach for a lot of people in the United States. And renting is growing very, very quickly. And I don't know what the stat is now, but I've seen it by 2030, renting and home ownership will be about 50-50, which is pretty crazy shift over the last 15, 20 years. So it's moving that direction. It's moving very quickly. But I think for us, like we want to really change the way that people think about the relationship with their renters. Operators think about the relationship with the renters and bridge that trust gap, and create value again for both sides of the lease, not only for the renter but for the operator. They can operate much better, and best in class technology is ultimately going to give them the ability to do that. And the downstream impact of that is a much better resident experience at the end of the day.
I had one more question on that, especially with looking at the future. Now, we've seen a huge shift in lifestyle, in choices, and people actually wanting to rent and not buy because it gives them that capability of moving from place to place, and they're not so tied down to something. Do you see that or envision that lifestyle, besides houses being out of reach of cost, but really it's the idea of this generation or this new way of lifestyle? Is this the future of the way we live, or is this kind of just a passing thing?
I think it's a trend that's here to stay. I think it started with a lifestyle shift, and it's become exacerbated by the obviously the cost of home ownership now. I think, as home ownership um, comes price of home ownership, if it comes down, I think that that we might see a small uptick there. But I think that generally what we're seeing, and this has been a trend for a very long time, even when interest rates were very, very low, of more people wanting to rent because they want that flexibility. And that it's a different way of living. And I think that's a trend that we're going to continue to see. I think it's here to stay for quite some time. And I think that ultimately the technology and the industry have to adapt to what the residents want, and it will. It's just, it's taking longer than I think than it should, personally.
Kevin, thank you so much for coming on Pillow Talk Sessions. It's been really great to have you as a guest and to hear your thoughts and insights. And how can our audience find out more about Renew and what is coming up next for you?
Yeah, they can check out our website, heyrenew.com. And for us, we are very, very focused right now on moving into, like I mentioned, leveraging AI to empower those operators, make their jobs easier, make that, bring more automation to their day to day so they can focus on that service recovery, because we really believe that is the first piece to, creating loyalty and moving into that, hotelification of rentals. And that's a big focus for us. And the next piece is the ecosystem, the marketplace. We believe, and we have so much data now to support that residents want to access that. They want to search it. And that's going to be a big thing for us. So stay tuned. It's definitely a shift in the way we think about things in this industry, but we're very excited to bring that to market in earnest.
Exciting times ahead for you guys. So we'll keep an eye out on you and watch you guys kick some goals. But Kevin, for me also, it's been a pleasure to have you at the show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Really appreciate the time. It's been great.
And that wraps it up for today's episode of Pillow Talk Sessions. Thank you so much for joining us, and to stay connected and never miss a conversation, head over to pillowtalksessions.com to subscribe. You can also follow us on LinkedIn for more insights and interviews with leaders shaping the future of hospitality, multifamily living, and community-driven spaces. Pillow Talk Sessions is brought to you by Abode Worldwide, the strategic public relations agency for tech brands and tech-enabled operators, transforming the way we work, play, and stay. Abode Worldwide creates category leaders and builds brand value across hospitality and modern rental living. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Pillow Talk Sessions.